What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Spirited. My name is Sam Nasreen, and I'm your host. And I'm joined today by kind of a celebrity, I guess you could say, in the whiskey world. This gentleman started a well-known and fairly well-respected whiskey brand and decided that he wanted to move on and keep creating and inventing new things. I am, of course, talking about the one and only Mr. Dave Schmier, who is creator of Ambassador and Senator and Independent, as well as the Tumblin Dice series, and is co-creator of Idle Hands. Dave, how are you today?
I'm good. Wouldn't say celebrity, more like a puppet master in the background. Could we go there?
We can call you whatever you want, as long as you're on time, right? Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not late for dinner.
Give or take.
So, talk to us a little bit about what it was like to start, what is probably one of the more well-known sourced whiskeys on the market.
Which one are we talking about?
I was talking about Redemption.
Okay. Well, so a lot of the journey has been about collaborating with other people. Redemption was myself and Mike Canbar over at Strong Spirits, and it was a long journey. We had both known each other from different industry events and bumping into each other in New York, trying to sell our previous brands. So we were aware of the challenges of bringing a brand to marketplace. Redemption was just a really cool kind of intersection of great crazy facts and things that were going on. Mike had just built Strong Spirits down in Kentucky. I started bottling with him when I was down in Kentucky. We drank a bit of whiskey, and we were fortunate enough to stumble onto the old LDI distillery, which was the old Seagram's distillery, of course, now known as MGP, and tried their rye. And I think it was the first stuff we had was 2 years old, and it was fantastic. And we kind of saw that rye was increasing in popularity, and we knew that we could bottle some and sell it, and we bottled that as Redemption. It's kind of the real simple story there.
So, Redemption has always, to my knowledge, been liquid from MGP, and I believe they're starting to do some of their own liquid now. But going with a completely sourced whiskey, was there that stigma around sourcing before? Because I'm sure, as you're well aware, that the stigma is, source whiskey, blah, 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 it's garbage or whatever, when obviously, it's not. Just being sourced doesn't mean it's garbage.
Well, I've been reading your book, and I know you're about 17 now. Is that what I got?
27.
So we started Redemption in 2010.
I was 18.
Okay. And 2010 seems like not that long ago, but it was really, it seems like generations ago at this point. In 2010, there were really a handful of what you would think of as craft or micro distilleries. And and there were a lot of them that had just gotten started. So there wasn't a lot to choose from outside of the big brands. And there also was not a lot of awareness of how whiskey worked when you went into a store. You would see all the brands on the shelf, and the assumption, and I'm part of this, everything was learning as you go, but your assumption was they were all made by some distillery where the distiller's grandfather and father before him had been doing that. And the reality was, I think, we could say maybe there were 10 big distilleries. And each of those distilleries, whether you look at Heaven Hill or Jim Beam or Buffalo Trace, there were a lot of brands coming from that same distillery. But a lot of people assumed that each of these brands had its own distillery. So there was a lot, wasn't as much knowledge as we have today. So we didn't even think about it in that respect. We just looked at it as, wow, this is really good whiskey, and we would like to put this in a bottle under our name and bring it to market. So we weren't.
That actually leads me to my next question, Dave, if you don't
Go ahead.
mind. What is the process like for, bottling something, sourcing it? How does it work? Because, obviously everyone's somewhat familiar with, the distillery that distills it themselves. They bottle it under their own label.
Right.
But not a lot of people are quite as familiar. I know I definitely am not familiar with the process of, hey, I want to go buy 50 barrels of liquid from MGP or from ADL, or, from Bardstown, even now that they're doing that,
Right.
so what is the process like? How do you go there? Are you picking the barrels? Are you going through the entire rick house?
As one of my favorite answers to any question is, it depends. There's a lot of different ways, and it really depends
Sure.
on where you're at. In some cases, you're fortunate enough to have that opportunity to say, hey, I want to buy, 2 really special barrels, and you get a tour through the rick house with a whiskey thief and someone pulling the barrels and going from one to another. That isn't often the case, at least not for me. We'll generally have the opportunity to get samples from different batches and decide to buy a bigger lot based on those samples. The great thing about dealing with LDI, MGP, former Seagram's distillery, always like to talk about the heritage of that place, because when they're in the initial conversation about sourced whiskey being something that you shouldn't do, which really doesn't carry any weight, but it was out there, is that with that distillery, we knew there was always a certain level of quality.
So how does it work for you when you decide, I want to create something? I want to make a new whiskey brand. And, you have an idea of it, or like, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're going to say it depends, on something or X or Y. But, I'm just curious what your mind sees and how it goes through your head and what your process is to create something like a Redemption or a Senator, Ambassador, or a Tumblin Dice.
So the common theme is, what whiskey do I have? And that's how I started. So with Redemption, when we started, when Mike and I started, the name of the company was Bardstown Barrel Selections, and our notion was we were going to go pick barrels in that romantic fashion where we're walking through the rick house with a whiskey thief and a flashlight and pick the choicest barrels we can find in Kentucky. But guess what? None of the distilleries who were selling whiskey really were keen on selling us their best barrels at that time. And we found the 2 to 3 year old LDI whiskey that became Redemption Rye, and we said, wow, this is great. And then we built the brand out of the whiskey that we had. That was kind of the process. And if I really look at it, that's really what I've been doing with Proof and Wood, just in a different way. And the name Proof and Wood is a nod to the fact that I do source almost everything, pretty much everything. That I'm not controlling the distillation process, but I control how old the whiskey is and what proof it is. And that makes a difference in how it tastes and what it looks like on the shelf. So I guess if there was a process, if I really thought like that, it would be starting from the whiskey, and then what can I do with that?
Have you found that, you just know for certain with something like the LDI MGP that this mash at this proof around this age is the sweet spot, that you don't have to try it, you just know it's going to be good, you can just blend with it?
if you want to talk sweet spot, I would say MGP Rye at barrel proof from 6 to 10 years old is a no lose proposition. You're always going to get good whiskey.
So let's say you have that 6 to 10 year barrel proof rye, and unless you're doing a single barrel, you're I would assume blending it for a consistent flavor. You know, what are you looking for? Kind of, how would you? What I'm really trying to get at is I'm trying to just demystify and understand for myself and for the viewers and listeners what it's like and what actually happens when you're sourcing whiskey.
The balance that I look for is really deep wood flavor, but that's not overpowering the spirit. So you know that you're drinking rye or you're drinking bourbon, and you're getting these great flavors that come from maturation in the wood.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you for explaining that. So let's jump off of the spirit for a second and kind of jump to you, if you don't mind, and talk about, a little bit, how the heck did you start doing this? So what was your start? How did you decide, I want to go start working and making whiskey and blending whiskey and stuff?
Pretty much nobody else would ever hire me, so I had to kind of do my own thing. It was a bunch of years trying to figure things out, and thinking change was around the corner, and kind of learning a little bit more about the business, learning about how I want to work in this business. And along the way, some really cool things happened. The notion of having an independent brand, again, remember, there weren't 3,000 distilleries in the country at that point in time, but there were quite a few entrepreneurs who were trying to do their own thing. And out of kind of meeting a lot of these people, started the Independent Spirits Expo in New York, I think in 2005. And it was just, designed as a platform for small brands to showcase what they were doing. And well, that's lived a good life until this year. We've done them.
That Mike Tyson quote, it affects me too right now, especially. You mentioned that you've been taking a look through my book, and thank you. I hope you're enjoying it.
I've got one bone to pick with you, but we've kind of touched on that already.
Please, I would love to hear it.
And it's not with you really, but it's the term NDP, non-distilling producer, which is a term that's become accepted and kind of came out of a place of negativity, as if somehow not distilling is something that you should say non to. But it's just one component in the process. As we talked about, sourcing is not a crime.
My understanding of sourcing and the term NDP, it never came from me, at least from a bad point of view. It was, this person doesn't distill their liquid, but they have control over their liquid. There's nothing wrong with being an NDP. There's some fantastic brands that are non-distilling producers. And, the idea, and that's something I was hoping that we would get to touch on. We have the idea that sourcing is a negative is a common thought, and it's a wrong thought. There is nothing wrong with sourcing liquid. My only issue is if you're sourcing and you're claiming it's your own.
Well, sure.
Other than that, source away by all means. Your entire whiskey line forever could be sourced, or you could be sourcing until you get on your feet. Whatever you want to do, as long as you're honest and upfront about it, then that's great.
I'll drink to that.
As will I. So, I want to jump back to focusing on you. So, you said you started a vodka brand, and you thought you were going to be the next Sidney Frank, it was going to be the next big thing. Then what happened?
The product was what I wanted it to be. I made a living doing marketing for big brands and did some really, really cool stuff. And it seemed pretty easy. What was lacking was an understanding of how the 3-tier distribution system was really a challenge.
Yeah.
And again, there's been kind of evolutions and ups and downs in the business. But, 15, 20 years ago, there weren't as many small or mid-sized spirits-focused distributors. So you'd go into a market and you'd have 2, 3 choices of big distributors, and they all had more important things than you.
Yeah.
And so you realized real quickly where you ranked, or didn't rank, as the case may be. But one of the things that had evolved when we launched Redemption was, one, I knew that I couldn't compete with the way the big companies went to market. It wasn't about programming and swag and tchotchkes. It was about, for us, it was about the product. And the fortunate thing is we found a growing group of like-minded distributors who really got what we were doing and knew how to go out and sell and where to sell what we were doing. Some of these people I'm still friends with, I'm still working with them, and what I've done wouldn't be possible without them. So that was, finding distributors that you can work with.
Absolutely. And now Redemption is quite a large brand, or larger brand.
Mm-hmm.
It was Deutsch, and I think you're doing really well with the brand.
They are.
When did you sign off from Redemption to go focus on Proof and Wood?
Pretty much the day we sold it. I probably should have taken a longer vacation.
So you left Redemption and you went to Proof and Wood. Now, what was the first thing you started on with Proof and Wood?
The first product was Deadwood, and Deadwood is what I like to call American table whiskey, and the idea was to create an everyday whiskey, do a bourbon and a rye with the best whiskey I can put in the bottle at the time point for the price. A 750 will cost 20 to 25, and then we do liters for bar service. And I'm proud to say that the whiskey in that bottle right now is really, really good. It's a great value for the money, much better than when I first started. But it was, when I first started, it was harder to get good young whiskey at a good price.
Would you say then that something like Ambassador and Senator are a little more niche?
They're limited. The demand for them seems to always outpace the supply. So I wouldn't call them niche in that respect. Talking about, starting with good whiskey and how does a brand come to be? I mean, that wasn't really a planned series. It started with my distributor in Washington, D.C. And I think about 2014, he came up with the idea maybe of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if for the inauguration, and he grew up in DC, and the inauguration was always a big party no matter who won. That was kind of a given in DC. Can we do a 4-year-old whiskey and call it 1 term, and an 8-year-old whiskey and call it 2 term? And with Proof and Wood, kind of went back to him, still interested. I found some really nice 4-year-old rye and some 8-year-old bourbon, and we bottled that as Presidential Dram and released it in 2016, 2017. It was kind of a fun idea originally. No one really saw the tension in the presidential election till it happened.
Sure.
But we focused on really talking about the whiskey in the bottle. And DC is such a great hospitality town that we sold out both the bourbon and rye within weeks because they liked the whiskey. So there wasn't much, drama behind that. So, that was successful. So when I was able to find the 12-year-old bourbon, it just made sense to kind of continue that series, and the Ambassador name kind of fit really well for it. So we launched that and then followed that up with the Senator, which is 6-year-old barrel proof rye. I think we did the Justice a couple of months ago, a 14-year-old Tennessee bourbon, and more to come.
For, the original Redemption rye batch, how many barrels roughly was it? And, how much, and was it more a thing of, we like barrels A, B, and C, and we like D, but we don't like it to want to put the whole barrel in? The flavor works better if it's not the whole barrel.
Our first whiskey, as I mentioned, was 2 to 3 years old. And we got to the point where we were able to buy 100 barrels of it. And then somewhere along the line, there was no more 2-year-old, 3-year-old rye whiskey to buy.
You bought it all.
There was a few of us buying it at that time, and there wasn't a lot of rye available. No one really saw all this coming. Well, 1 or 2 people did. Dave, absolutely. And Dave was always very, very helpful.
I miss that man.
One of my favorite pictures is, I guess I first really met Dave in 2009 when Mike opened up Strong Spirits and I was still bottling my orange flavored vodka. And I've got a picture of Dave mixing up of that of my orange vodka. And he was, you would think he would look down on it, but he was as happy as can be.
Of course he was. That sounds so much like Dave.
Yeah, so Dave and other folks down in Bardstown were really helpful. But where we got into, real basic blending was when there was no 2-year-old rye, but we were able to buy 18-month-old rye. And then our rye that we already owned was now 3 and 4 years old. So our first blending project was to kind of mimic the flavor of the 2-year by blending the
18 months was 3 and 4.
Yeah, and it's not linear, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
So just getting to that point where we didn't have to be exact, but we had to be in that range.
In the ballpark, sure.
Yeah, and then you pick up really simple things that the younger whiskey would bring a brightness that the older whiskey didn't. And there was definitely
especially with rye
for that, but you were getting deeper flavor out of the older whiskey.
Well, really a question and a statement. I'm gonna go with the statement first. Talking about Dave Pickerel, guys like Dave, guys like yourself, who really have a passion for this business, and you're out there every day. You're approachable guys. Some of the people who blend for big houses or who distill, we never see them. We never hear from them. It's all, the ambassadors who do a great job, mind you. Don't get me wrong. Basically, I just wanted to say, I appreciate the fact that gentlemen like yourself, like Dave Pickerel, are just so, down to earth and humble and friendly and approachable, and are whiskey geeks and whiskey nerds, want to put out good stuff and want to talk about the stuff that they love.
Well, first, I'm probably not at the same level, nearly even close to where he was, but it's just a different way of doing business. I mean, my volume is tiny, but I do pretty much everything, of course, except the distilling myself. When you get to a bigger brand, there's 30 people doing everything that I do, and they probably all individually do each task much better than I do. But it's just a different approach, and it's fun having your hands in every piece of the business, but and understanding how it goes from being in a barrel to the interaction on a shelf and with retail.
I'm not trying to bash the bigger brands whatsoever. I have some good friends who work for some of the bigger brands as ambassadors, and they're really great at what they do. And yeah, with a bigger brand, there are more people doing, you as one person doing the job of 20 to 30 people, sure. And level, whether you think Dave's on a different level or not, gentlemen like yourselves, I'm talking about guys like you and Dave with that mindset, with that personality type, are just so awesome to talk to and speak with, because you show that you care beyond just like, yeah, I'm in this for the money, or, oh yeah, it's a job. It's a passion is what I find most of the time. So I'm just wanted to say thank you for that. And my question, you can have one whiskey for the rest of your life, one bottle, or sorry, no, you can have one bottle, a taste of any one bottle you want that's ever existed from today back. You can try any one bottle. What is it and why?
The whiskey that I would like to try is the first whiskey that was distilled at the distillery that became MGP back in 1847 or whatnot. That would make
Right
me
on.
happy.
That sounds like it'd be fun.
So if you can find me that bottle, I will
Dave, I like you,
I will
but
trade you this tumbling dice.
I like it, but I don't think I can get a hold of that bottle. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Guys, check out Tumblin Dice, check out the Ambassador, check out the Senator, and check out Proof of Wood Ventures. He has some amazing whiskeys, and check out Idle Hands too, which is another one of Dave's projects.